Well, hello there, and welcome back to the studio today. So let's go ahead and get started. Those of you in the online class, this is now the working up stage. So this would have been a local color, and there's a lot that needs to be done to this painting. So I'm just mixing up the flake white and the cadmium red vermilion, and now a little bit of yellow ochre. I pretty much stick with the Alizarin palette for flesh colors, so I want a little puddle here of flesh color that I can use. I apologize for the motion of the palette. I have the palette set onto a tripod. A little bit of Gamboge like extra. And I'll just keep mixing till I have a nice consistency to fill this area here. And let's go ahead and just test. And that looks about good. So, as I mentioned, there is a lot that needs to be done to this painting. So I'm gonna really take my time now with this. The way that this is being filmed, the way that this master study has been going on, it is intended to be a extended paint along. You can paint along with me, and if you're in the online class, this is also an extracurricular activity, which means you can send me an image each week of your work on this extracurricular activity, along with your the option that you have to send me an image of your project that you're working on each week in the online class. And my online students are doing really well. One of them or two of them are painting along with me with this one, so I'm very excited. So I'm just starting on an area to warm up. I don't want to just jump right into the eye, just because that would be kind of difficult. So I'm working around the eye. And hopefully you can see the palette all right. You know, I confess there's also a self-portrait of Rembrandt where you can see he's holding a square palette. And that was part of me wanting a square palette, just between us. So I'm pushing this value a little bit darker. And what I'm going to do is now start to put in more specificity. I will admit that in my opinion, the best way to oil out the painting when you're going to oil out is to probably use spike lavender and linseed or walnut oil in appropriate ratios. Looking back, I think I would have really preferred to make the Rembrandt a lot larger. It's a little smaller than I would want. You know, it's not even as big as my hand, the face. And the majority of the footage will be the face and up here. Let's start to put something up here. A little bit of Venetian medium. I'll put on a good old glaze. Let's make it a little less yellow. What I'm probably doing is painting in the yellow from the varnish yellowing over time. I think this would have been cooler. And again, I'm using Google Arts and Culture for photo references. Link is in the description. So what you want to do is have a way of working that is logical, but not dreadful. A way of working that you enjoy. And I have students that are using different materials. I have students using water mixable oils, acrylic, a bunch of different mediums. I really do think that the principles are universal. So really you can use whatever medium you want. Just because you see me here using lead-based paints and talking about trying to have higher quality paints and things like that. Use what works for you. That yellow is starting to bother me. Now we're really starting to get that that transparent glow from layering or glazing directly over top of the underpainting. So now you can really see the chiaroscuro start to take effect. And painting and talking, like what I'm doing here, is usually not the best way to go about creating an instructional art video, but from the comments, it seems like this is what everyone prefers, and it's what I like to do as well. I prefer this sometimes, other times I prefer the voiceover. But I can explain things to you as I'm doing this, because I'm using a little bit of the ultramarine blue, which is a mistake because I don't think Rembrandt would have had that. Maybe I should just take the ultramarine blue out. Back in the day, blue was very expensive. So I don't think that Rembrandt at this point was using ultramarine blue. Back then they were using genuine ultramarine blue. If you want to look for really awesome examples of the usage of genuine ultramarine blue, check out Vermeer. Vermeer definitely had the blue in his paintings. I'm cleaning off the brush slightly with the turpentine that is on the bottom here. This is the same one I used. It's a single distilled turpentine. Which is another reason why I have a fan in here. You can use turpentine and be fine. Clearly it is not good for your health to ingest it, alright, or breathe it in all the time. So I'm not gonna lie to you and say you'll be perfectly fine, but you'll be perfectly fine. I think that there's a lot of fear these days with oil paints spontaneously combusting and breathing in the harsh fumes and things. As long as you have a good studio practice. I have a metal bin. I put all my oily rags after I'm done painting for the day. I put all the rags in a metal bin, make sure that it's sealed, and it's all good. I'm trying to unify this halftone here, or this edge, with the hair. I'm gonna get into the hair soon. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna do these uploads, because I don't just want to prematurely say that this painting is complete when it starts to resemble the Rembrandt, which at this point it does not. It's nowhere near completion, but I don't know. I have to figure out how to upload more footage for you. And hopefully this helps you being able to see what I'm mixing here. A lot of my color mixtures are just intuitive. In the start, however, I pre-mixed the flesh tones for the face just to make sure that there's a sense of unity with the flesh colors. I believe that's a little too cold. I'm going to use the Alizarin Crimson Lake Extra. Yes, I know that Alizarin Crimson historically has been shown to be a fugitive color. I know, but I trust Old Holland. What I want is to get as close as I possibly can to learning the techniques. Not just the techniques, but to get the effects that painters have achieved in the past, such as Rembrandt, Vermeer, Caravaggio. So I snuck in some of the Alizarin Crimson into the dark. It's just something I like to do. We're gonna a very interesting texture here for the hair. Another word of advice on mediums and techniques is to utilize these little thingies. Usually I don't have the palette like this. I prefer to hold the palette, but I usually will just use a drop of medium at a time whenever I need it. In the past I used to just have a cup like this, where I would have one with the thinner and then another one here with medium. But what that does is that you end up having dirty medium that you end up reusing. So instead, I think it might be better to use a drop at a time. That way you know exactly what the content is of the oil in your painting. And of course, just use what you think you need. Contrary to the alla prima style approach, where you want to have all these colors and bold brush marks and things, what you want is to put just enough. I really don't mind having to put more medium, but in general it's just better studio habits to work like this if you are trying to achieve a classical look to your paintings. Especially in this fast-paced world, it's important to take a step back and really spend your time. I'm just walking around asking myself, does this look like the image? And if it doesn't, why not? And then adjust. So that's why we're working the painting up. So right now, the first thing that caught my eye is that the ear has a little more light on it, down here. Now this is definitely a place where I want flake white, because flake white, it's kind of like an interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary, it's like a mix between sculpting and painting. Because with the flake white, with the lead-based white, you can really have a very nice consistency of color. Whereas titanium white is a little too bright. It raises the value way too fast. It doesn't have the thickness, the thick feeling that you get from using flake white. Again, this is flake white from Williamsburg. Not sponsored by anyone, so I'm telling you just based off of my experience. I'm going to push the dark a little darker behind Rembrandt's head, the shadow side. I actually prefer to use cooler colors in the background and warmer colors, like when I snuck in the alizarin for the hair, the darks of the hair. I'll also use, when we get here, I'll use a little bit of the alizarin. Cooler colors tend to push back. Warmer colors tend to push forward. And typically, at this point, you don't want to use too much thick paint, too many thick paint mixtures. Because now in this stage, the working up of the painting, you're going to want the painting to dry relatively quickly in between layers. Old Holland, I like Old Holland, how it tends to dry a little faster, especially my alizarin. Whereas when I had the alizarin permanent from, I think it was Gamboge, it would take an eternity to dry. If you paint thin enough, it can dry in 24 hours. Especially with flake white. I may try out Rublev flake white, or lead white number 2. It has walnut oil. So I may end up trying that one next. But for now, I really enjoy Williamsburg. Alrighty, so that was the first 20-minute interval. So now, just like before, I'm filming in 20-minute intervals. So what I do is just take a short break, in between each interval. I highly recommend that you take breaks. I'm sitting here and painting. I can easily sit here for an hour and not even get up. But I think it's important to have distance between your subject, what you're painting. And because of the camera, like I can't like have my face right in front of the painting, so it also helps to push the camera, kind of pushes me further back. I can already feel the paint starting to tack up. And what I do, which is a good thing, what I do is instead of putting the paint in the freezer, I have concerns about putting paint in the freezer now. The more I do research, the research I do for painting, I typically will look for art conservationists, either like a PDF online or a YouTube talk. So it's nice to see and hear lectures of art conservationists and how they use x-rays and look at the layers of paintings such as Rembrandt's and such. My concern with freezing paints, I could be wrong with this, probably am, but my concern is after you freeze the paint, I feel like the condensation that forms around the color when it is thawing will get into the paint. I don't know, I feel like it might get into the paint and harm the paint film. That's just my opinion. Go ahead and comment down if you know a little more towards the art conservation aspect and how freezing paints might not be the best thing to do. So instead, what I do is at the end of the day, I take all of my colors and put them on a piece of glass and just let them sit there overnight and kind of go through the paint. And if something starts to get tacky, like the raw umber, if it gets too tacky, I just put it off to the side and only put the paint out that is fresh. The last thing you want to do is spend an eternity on a painting and then have it not be archival. You know, who knows, maybe someday in the future, like a family or whoever, an art collector or whoever would purchase this as a Rembrandt study that was featured on a YouTube channel, who knows how long ago, framed, varnished, signed. It would be pretty sad if down the line the painting starts to chip or yellow prematurely, and that's not what I want at this stage. Sometimes in my older videos from 3 years ago or however long, you would see me do an alla prima, a one-sitting painting, voice it over and all that. But the problem is back then I didn't really do the research into the paint film and into classical painting. So that's an important thing to always learn as much as you can about not only the techniques but about the materials themselves. And so what's going on in my mind is taking a step back, glance at the photo reference, create kind of like an animation in my mind, my mind's eye, moving my eye back and forth from photo reference painting, and trying to see what jumps out. That definitely is the wrong value, but and I'm painting all around, trying to identify things that are different. And once I identified that the concavity of the eye socket was darker, I'm now going in and testing, putting in a little spot of paint and testing it. Now I see that I could have a little more of a specific shape here. And doing this Rembrandt study, I would highly recommend you use this red. This is a vermilion, cadmium red vermilion. This color right here, because Rembrandt, let's get the autofocus correct. So Rembrandt would have been using genuine vermilion, which which I would like to purchase as well. I believe Rublev makes it. It's a very expensive pigment. But the cadmium red vermilion by Williamsburg is by far my favorite red to use for skin tones. And there's something special to classical oil paintings, classical realist oil paintings from whichever century. There's something special about something that is handmade, and it's an art form that is one of the oldest art forms that we have. So it has a very rich history. And we're fortunate enough to be living in a time where access to learning this information, access to the education for this is so, it's everywhere. You can easily find online classes, not just mine, but you can find other teachers. And there's just something so special about a realist painting, hundreds of hours spent. It looks realistic, but at the same time, it deviates from nature, as all realist paintings do, and describe a little bit about the mindset of the artist, the person that created it. It transcends time in that kind of sense. Even though it's one moment that you're looking at, but it's the accumulation of hundreds of hours. Maybe not hundreds, of course, but lots of hours. And I think that's just something so poetic. I think it's one of the things that draws me to painting. He's almost kind of smirking at us. His expression here is very complex. Yeah, I can't quite figure out what his expression is. I can tell with his eyebrows lifted, it's definitely a sense of you know, kind of almost smiling. But the way he's gazing at us, I think this is part of what makes Rembrandt so what he said to be as a painter that, you know, can capture this human soul. And this is a very complex facial expression. I know this is going to take a long time for me to take this to completion, but it's very interesting to observe this. I almost don't even know what's going on there. I'm just looking for planes. And it's okay to not know in the process of painting. It's okay to experiment. You know, it's not like I have a checklist for every brush stroke. You know, every brush stroke doesn't have to take you to the finish, but take you towards an understanding of where you're heading in the painting. Looking at my screen on the camera, it appears that the color is a little too cold. So that's one thing to take into account. And though this process does take a long time, each step or each day that I work on multiple paintings. So I may spend about an hour and a half on one painting. I'll probably spend an hour or two on this one today, and then move on to one of the other ones. Or sometimes I'll just prepare surfaces for painting. Lately I'm working on panels. One little trick that I like to do with the nose, the bulb of the nose, is actually glaze it. The roundness of the bulb of the nose, just glaze the entire thing. And then work into that. I mean, I left the highlight there, right? But then work into that alla prima. So wet on wet. To try to emphasize the pointiness or the roundness of the nose. So I'm kind of like sculpting the curvature of the nose. And subtlety just means how close can I get two shapes or two things to one another, yet maintain their differentiation from one another. So that's one little trick there of how I try to get more accuracy, more volume, should I say, more volume into the structures. And I do that repeatedly. One thing I noticed with Rembrandt is that he usually will make the irises really dark. I would love to see this painting in person, because I think that the dark there could just be the photograph being too, the exposure maybe being too high. Either way, I painted it in. I think that was maybe 2 videos ago. Alright, so we passed another 20 minutes, so I'm going to take a break. Alrighty, so now we are approaching the third 20-minute interval. So I just took a little break, had a cup of coffee, and yeah, it's important, as I mentioned before, to take breaks, because then you can see things that you didn't see previously. So I had kind of lost some of the form up here above the eyebrow. And also I can describe a little bit more specificity for the eye socket there. You know, I get asked this question a lot. How do you paint wrinkles? I tend to think of what someone would call a wrinkle as a form overlap. I feel like the word wrinkle is a little too generic and vague. So I think of it as an overlap of form: top plane, bottom plane, top plane, bottom plane, side plane over here. Almost got some alizarin on my pinky. You know, this is one thing I have to look forward to as I age. You know, right now I'm 29. I imagine when I'm in my 60s, I'll be able to do self-portraits and have fun with all of these form overlaps. Or 80s. I don't know how old Rembrandt was here. I'm sure we can figure that out by looking at the date when it was created. I'm very careful with these edges. I'm kind of knitting the edges. What brush do you use, you say? This brush is probably less than $1. I use pretty cheap watercolor brushes, typically round, because it has the feel of a pencil. and working with the graphite. In the past, I would use a lot of filberts, but now I kind of prefer round. Though in the beginning, when we're piling on a lot of color, a lot of paint, that is, as you recall, I do have a specific type of brush that I like to use, which is a bristle brush. I like to use Robert Simmons brand. So you see I'm kind of like knitting each little plane. And again, building the texture, the skin color with the flake white, you know, it creates a really nice effect. And I can see the layer underneath, and then next time we'll be able to see, or whenever this dries and then I work on it again, we'll be able to see the accumulation of all those layers. A little more medium, a Venetian medium. I had this a little too yellow. I think I can push the value a little brighter there. A lot of this is kind of just instinct. And what does my instinct tell me that needs to change? So in a sense, it's a very perceptual approach. Which I suspect is how Rembrandt probably would have worked as well. It's known that he didn't, at least I heard that it's known that he didn't transfer drawings, which I think is a safer way to start, but he's known as a more direct painter, which is the approach we're using here, but we're putting in quite a number of layers. I'm going to switch brushes. So now I'm going to do some more work in the shadows. I can really see a lot of those reflected lights. I wonder where it's coming from and where in his studio he had this. When you look at the image, when you zoom out, there's a lot of warm reflected light here. I don't know where it's coming from. I think that maybe there was a piece of furniture, because we know he used window light, right? So the window light's coming from here. This red had to have come from somewhere. So I think there might be off to the side some kind of wooden furniture. As we know, Rembrandt was a collector of sorts. So he liked to collect antique things. Because that warmth wouldn't come from his jacket, nor would it come from the scrolls that he's holding. It had to come from something. And that warm reflected light is definitely Vermilion influenced. I mean, he definitely had to have used Vermilion here. Which is why we have the Cadmium Red Vermilion. This one here. And in case you want to purchase any of these colors, just check out the description box down below. I've got you. There's links there for you. We know that this is a self-portrait. He's posing as an apostle. So we know that there is a narrative to this. So I wonder if that warm reflected light here has something to do with his narrative. Oh, but there's just something so magical about the cadmium red vermilion in the shadows. I don't know if any of you have seen the TV show Hannibal. You know the main character that plays Hannibal on Netflix? How he describes food, how he describes anything. It sounds very sophisticated. I feel like using these higher quality materials, it's almost like I'm imagining the actor from the Hannibal Lecter TV series on Netflix describing the richness of the colors. This is by far my favorite palette setup in terms of the colors and the actual wooden palette itself. I don't quite follow what this is when I look at the photo reference. I think it's his shirt. I don't know if we'll get to that today. Now we've got just a minute left in this 20-minute segment, so no, we're not going to get to that. But we will push this bottom plane a little darker. Now if you really want to push your technique, you really want to pursue this type of realist painting, it's very important, I think, to take into account the necessity of each stage and not rush it, not rush anything. You know, simply because my timer, or I don't have a timer, but simply because the timer is going to go off, or, you know, we have to go and pick up the kids, or, well, kids are not going to school right now, but, you know, if we have to stop abruptly for any reason, everything is okay. You know, you know that your painting will dry in a reasonable amount of time, and you know that you can continue to work up the painting. It's a very relaxing thing. It's important to have a set of steps that is methodical. Not overly methodical, however, but, you know, I'm fine with the timer going off and the painting being the way it is, because every layer that we put on this painting now is going to be getting it closer and closer to the finish that we're after. But know that the finish is not something that just happens. You know, some painters can do that, a la Primo style. They can go in and in one day make something look very realistic, but it will not have the texture, it will not have the depth that a painting does that is layered. And this is something I think that's rarely seen on YouTube or on the internet, just because I mean, I'm guilty of this. Like, we want to produce content as much as possible because that's how we survive. But what I'm doing here is really trying to give you the reality, show you the reality, and hopefully give you some peace of mind knowing that, you know, as long as you have a strategy, it's okay to take all the time you need to finish your paintings. If you would like to see more painting videos like this one, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to take online classes or have access to things such as a live stream painting demonstrations, live chats, of course, as I mentioned, the online classes, along with a weekly behind the scenes video, please check out my Patreon, patreon.com/YupariArtist. I will have links in the description box down below to the online class on Patreon. I'll also have the Amazon affiliate links so you can purchase the same types of materials that I'm using. And again, I highly recommend this this palette, the New Wave Highland palette. Such a wonderful palette to use, and I have, of course, that linked on Amazon. That being said, I hope you have a wonderful week, a wonderful day, morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it may be. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one. And it's now time for our new patron shoutouts. And so thank you so much, Wayne, Carrie Humphreys, and Carol Ita White. I hope I can pronounce your names properly. I apologize that I couldn't create the patron shoutout last week, so this is the new patron shoutout for the past 2 weeks. So thank you so much for joining my Patreon. Your support means so much to me. Your support means the world to me. I hope that you will be able to enjoy the benefits offered on my Patreon, such as the weekly behind-the-scenes episodes, along with the online classes, the live chat, and the live stream tier. Thank you so much for all of your support, and I'll see you on the next one.